Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
It is often said that history is written by the victors. But what happens when the victors lose control of the narrative? What happens when ancient fragments and scattered oral traditions begin to whisper a truth that stands in sharp contrast to the stories we've been told for centuries? In a world where ethnicity and identity were rewritten by empires and kings, one of the most compelling mysteries remains buried in plain sight: the true appearance and legacy of the biblical tribe of Benjamin. Though forgotten or distorted by mainstream historical narratives, traces of Benjamin's identity remain carefully woven into biblical texts, ancient Hebrew traditions, African oral histories, and forgotten Ethiopian records. What emerges from the shadows is a startling proposition. The tribe of Benjamin was Black, African in origin, language, and appearance. And the clues were always there, though never taught. The tribe of Benjamin holds a unique position in the ancient Israelite world. Born of Jacob's beloved wife Rachel, Benjamin was the only full brother of Joseph, making his bloodline both royal and distinct among the 12 tribes of Israel. From his earliest mention in Genesis, Benjamin's lineage was wrapped in emotion, survival, and divine destiny. His mother died giving birth to him, naming him Benoni, or son of my sorrow, before Jacob renamed him Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. These small details, often overlooked, have far greater significance when traced alongside the broader Afro-Semitic identity of the ancient Israelites. Throughout biblical texts, the tribe of Benjamin is depicted as dark, fierce, and deeply spiritual. The prophet Jeremiah, a Benjamite, is often described as a weeping prophet, not just for his emotional lamentations, but because he mourned a people who were losing their way, both spiritually and culturally. What is often not taught is that Jeremiah, by both biblical lineage and geography, lived in a region known today as part of the Southern Kingdom, an area dominated by the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, whose populations were largely composed of darker-skinned Hebrews. This is not merely speculative. Several ancient Jewish and Arab commentators, as well as Ethiopian and North African scribes, preserve physical descriptions of the Israelites that reflect sub-Saharan African characteristics: woolly hair, bronze or black skin, and facial features consistent with peoples of the African continent. To dismiss these descriptions as symbolic or metaphorical is to ignore how ancient people described physical traits. The Hebrew Bible frequently refers to skin color in literal terms, often associating divine favor or identity with natural earthly elements, bronze, coal, or burnt brass. Revelation 1 verses 14 to 15 describe the Messiah, a descendant of Judah, Benjamin's close neighbor and ally, as having hair like wool and feet like burnished bronze as if burned in a furnace. These words, paired with similar Old Testament passages, are not mere poetic license but represent a vivid racial reality lost through centuries of Greco-Roman and European Christian reimagination. The Benjamites were known as warriors, skilled archers, and left-handed fighters, rare and elite attributes in ancient times. Judges 20 recounts a civil war between Benjamin and the other tribes of Israel, where Benjamin's warriors displayed such remarkable skill and courage that they nearly defeated the entire Israelite confederation. This level of military discipline and independence speaks not only to their physical prowess but their tribal pride, traditions, and identity. Ancient African warrior cultures, such as the Nubians, the Ethiopians, and the Moors, were likewise known for their elite martial training and resistance against larger forces. Could the martial DNA of Benjamin be preserved and reflected in these African warrior legacies? Many Afro-Caribbean and African-American scholars believe the answer is yes. Further historical support for the African identity of Benjamin comes from post-exilic writings and the movement of Israelite populations after the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities. When northern Israel fell to Assyria, many of its inhabitants, including Benjamites, fled south or were scattered into Egypt, Kush, modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia, and even farther west across North Africa. The Book of 1 Maccabees and other apocryphal texts suggest that remnants of the tribes continued their religious observance in Egypt and Ethiopia long after Jerusalem fell. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest surviving Christian communities in the world, maintains ancient manuscripts referencing the children of Benjamin alongside Judah, Dan, and Levi among those who settled in their lands. Some Ethiopian tribal elders even trace their lineage back to Benjamin, referring to themselves as sons of the right hand in their Guizi oral traditions. Moreover, historical figures such as Paul the Apostle explicitly identify as Benjamites. In Philippians 3 verse 5, Paul proudly declares his lineage, circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. Yet Paul, who was mistaken for an Egyptian, Acts 21 verse 38, clearly had a physical appearance consistent with North Africans or darker-skinned Middle Easterners. Roman historians and early Christian commentators like Tertullian and Origen made frequent references to the dusky and swarthy complexions of early Christians from Judea, especially those hailing from regions inhabited by Judah and Benjamin. This further reinforces the notion that Benjamites, like Paul, were not the pale-skinned, European-styled figures later Renaissance paintings would have the world believe, but rather people of African descent and features. Oral traditions preserved among West African tribes also tell a similar story. Among the Igbo people of Nigeria, who claim descent from various tribes of Israel, there is a subclan said to descend specifically from Benjamin. These oral traditions, combined with cultural practices like circumcision on the 8th day, strict dietary laws, and Hebrew-sounding names, have led to increasing scholarly interest in a West African Israelite connection. The Fulani and Lemba tribes, found in regions of Nigeria, Mali, and southern Africa, likewise claim Israelite heritage, with DNA studies confirming Middle Eastern paternal lineages among some Lemba clans. But even more significantly, their own traditions state that they came from the East, fled destruction, and carried priestly and tribal knowledge across the African continent. Some of these accounts specifically identify Benjamin as an ancestral line. One must also consider the effect of European colonization and biblical reinterpretation. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were stripped of identity, names, and history. Yet many enslaved Africans in Jamaica, Haiti, the American South, and Brazil held on to fragments of an older biblical consciousness. In the slave songs and spirituals, figures like Benjamin, Moses, and David were not distant Hebrew myths but ancestral archetypes. They referred to themselves as Israelites, children of Zion, and warriors in Babylon. These weren't metaphors, they were memory. When scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries began noticing the persistence of Hebrew customs among black communities in America and the Caribbean, they were quick to dismiss it as mimicry. But how can one mimic something never taught? How can a people stolen from their land and denied literacy invent an identity so detailed it mirrors ancient tribal structures and Levitical codes? The tribe of Benjamin was black, not in some vague metaphorical sense, but in the literal, historical, and anthropological truth of their appearance, traditions, and migrations. The ancient Israelites, including Benjamin, were a confederation of Afro-Asiatic tribes whose roots stretched deep into the African soil, and whose descendants continue to rise, awaken, and rediscover the power of who they are. The world may have hidden these clues, twisted the scriptures, and redrawn the faces of the prophets, but truth, like the Benjamite warriors of old, refuses to stay silent. It fights, it survives, and eventually it returns home.